Welcome back, everyone. This is the Changelog, and I'm your host, Adam Stacoviak. This is episode 176, and on today's show, we're talking to the creator of CodeNewbie, Saron Yitbarek. She's also the host of their podcast, CodeNewbie Podcast. CodeNewbie is a supportive community of programmers and people learning to code. Great things Saron is doing. A lot of fun conversation today. We had 4 awesome sponsors: CodeShip, TopTal, Harvest, and Imagix. Our first sponsor of the show is CodeShip. They're your hosted, continuous delivery service, focusing on speed, security, and customizability. And they love the changelog, longtime supporters of the show. And today, you can get set up using CodeShip's continuous integration features in a matter of seconds and automatically deploy your code when your tests have passed. CodeShip supports your GitHub and your Bitbucket projects, so no worries there. And you can get started with CodeShip's free plan today, or you can decide to go with a premium plan later on and use our code, the Changelog Podcast, to save 20% off any plan you choose for 3 months. Again, that code is the Changelog Podcast. Head to codeship.com/thechangelog to get started. And now on to the show. All right, everyone, we're back. We got a great show lineup today. We got Saron joining us, the host of CodeNewbie. Jared, we've been waiting for this show for a while. I think it started back as a ping, kind of, in a way.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, all the way back in January 4th, I think GitHub user Dr. Vince Knight wrote in saying, loving the
awesome
podcast.
Name.
Yeah, isn't it? Must be
It is awesome.
PhD.
Must be a doctor. Yeah.
Smart guy. And he said, over the past 3 years, I've gone from complete open source ignorant to humbly, shyly contributing to some projects. I still very much consider myself a noob and would have thought there are others like me. I think a neat episode could be an overview of getting involved with open source. And he goes on to suggest a show for noobs, which I didn't really know exactly how to put that together for a while, so I kind of just sat on it. Finally, I thought, who's really good with noobs is Saron Yitbarek with CodeNewbie.
Woo.
So I just kind of said, hey, thanks for writing in. Maybe you could, listen to CodeNewbie. That'd be great. And then I just happened to mention Saron on the issue, at which point she chimed in and said, oh, let's get together and have a show. And so here we
That was
are.
back in January?
Yep, January.
Wow, and
That
this
was
is
January? Oh,
Well,
wow.
his original issue was January. It hasn't been that long since you chimed in. I think it was July. So
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say, well,
I'm
that's
kind
a
of
long
glad
time.
that I'm glad that you waited because I think the show's gotten a lot better. So good job. Good job waiting until we got better.
procrastination, FTW.
So I guess without further ado, since you've been chatting here, Saron, for those who don't listen to your show or only listen to it a few times and don't know fully who you are, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. I am Saron. I'm host of the CodeNewbie podcast. And we actually do a lot of stuff beyond the podcast. But the idea came from really my own coding journey. I guess it's been a little over 2 years ago at this point. So when I first learned to code, I learned mostly on my own, for a few months, just in my apartment. I quit my job. I did it full time. I did Treehouse and Code School and a bunch of other resources that your listeners are probably familiar with. And it was sad and lonely and frustrating. And it was really hard to learn on my own. And then I applied and got accepted into a programming boot camp, and I did that for 3 months. And it was, a great experience for me. I learned a ton. But what I really got out of it was the community. It was really just, sitting next to a bunch of people who were just as excited, just as passionate, who were just as terrified as I was learning to code. And that's really where the value was. And I felt that, to get that value, it cost me $11,000 in a total of 6 months without a job, which, fortunately I can afford, but a lot of people can't. And I really wanted to provide a community for people who were struggling and learning to code on their own and making the switch the way that I did. And so it started with just a Twitter chat. It started with, using the hashtag CodeNewbie and just me tweeting out from my personal account and saying, hey, if you're out there and you're learning to code, what are you learning? What are you excited about? What are some languages? What are some resources that you'd like to share? And people responded. And we did that for, many months, and it kept growing and it kept building momentum. And it got to a point where I said, these Twitter chats are great, but you can't really do in-depth conversations with Twitter chats. And so I said, a podcast is a really good format for in-depth conversations. And so that's how the podcast got started. And then from there, we've started doing project nights. So once a week, we have a Ruby team, we have a JavaScript team, we have a Python team, and we actually started doing Saturday discussions, and we're doing a book club as well. And we're starting a new thing called Iron Coder, where people challenge each other and take on little code katas and work together to solve them. And so the idea, it's really, really neat. We're launching that one actually very soon. So by the time this goes on air, we'll have done a couple of them. And the best part is, we're not an education team. We're not we're not a school. We're a place where you can come and find support, and you can work on things together. And we find these little excuses to bring people together. So that's what we're about.
Very interesting.
Very cool. I think, man, that was a whirlwind tour. Let's camp out a little bit.
Yeah.
And I mean, you come a long ways, and it's really quite astounding. But you mentioned Flatiron. You mentioned trying some code school and code academies yourself. Unlike many people, you're coming to this, and like many, so there's many of us out there. But this isn't your first career.
Yes.
Maybe take us back a little bit. Tell us what you did before you decided that you're going to be a code newbie, and then at the tail end of that, well, I'll just ask a follow-up, but just to lead into that is like, why would you even want to switch to this career? But start with, where have you been before?
So that second question is really funny because very senior developers ask me that all the time. And I'm like, because it's awesome. So, hopefully I won't be, jaded and sad later on in my career. But right now I'm still really excited. But to answer your first question, when I was in undergrad, I thought I was going to be a doctor. And I did all the pre-med courses. I studied organic chemistry. I taught organic chemistry. I was a biochemistry research fellow. I'm a published author. Like, I've done a lot of stuff in the hard sciences. And then I think it was my end of my junior year, I actually shadowed a doctor, which I should have done much sooner. And I realized that what I liked about science was the problem solving, and it was the figuring out like what really is going on and what caused this and how did this happen. And it wasn't so much the saving lives part, just me being very honest. And I thought, I probably shouldn't be a doctor if that's not the part I'm really excited about. And so, I thought, what the hell do I do now? And I'd always done journalism. I interned at an NPR member station in DC. I wrote for a college paper. I was an online editor for a college magazine. And so I decided to pursue journalism. And I worked at NPR for a short bit. I worked at Discover Magazine. And in that time, I read the Steve Jobs book. And to me, that book really just changed my life because for the first time, technology was presented in a way that got me excited about creating. And I'd never, ever thought of myself as a creator when it comes to tech. I always thought of myself as a consumer.
I was going to say, was that his bio, the Walter Isaacson one?
Yes.
Or yes.
The ridiculously long bio. Yes, that one. And it was great because it was this guy who, wasn't a very nice person, but he brought together design and emotions and storytelling and beauty and all these things that I could connect to, having written stories and done a lot of media stuff with like the hardcore tech. And so I said, I need to get in on this. I don't know what this is, but I need to be here. And so I worked at a few different startups doing everything that was not technical. And I did that for, I think it was 2 to 3 years. And I felt like every time I was hitting this wall where I couldn't do what I really wanted to do. I couldn't make anything because I didn't know how to make things. I couldn't even have a real conversation about UX and UI and, anything because I didn't have those skills. And so I felt like if I wanted to make products and if that's the person I wanted to be, I really did have to learn to code.
Yeah, because as I was just kind of back-channeling with Adam, the thought that crossed my mind when you said the Steve Jobs bio kind of inspired you is that he's famously not an engineer, right? He's a salesman and an innovator and many, many things. But, someone criticized because he was not a software developer.
He's a leader.
That's right.
I think that's what we need. I think that, something that you said a bit earlier, Jerry, was like those who are already developers kind of ask the question to someone like Saron to say, well, what is it that you like about software development or engineering? And, Saron, your reply was, it's awesome.
It's so much fun.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's the thing. So right now, I actually work at Microsoft as a program manager, and I was hired on not to be a developer, not to be a coder, but to manage a program that I think we'll talk about a little bit later called Tech Jobs Academy. And recently, I've gotten to do a lot more software stuff, and I've gotten to both do product development, but also code. And what's really fascinating is I feel like having worked at startups, having done a lot of producty stuff, I'm able to bring that to the table. But because I also know how to code, I can connect with our engineers much, much better than other people can. And I
Yeah.
think that, it's not so much that, and it's not that I feel like I need to be the best programmer and that's the goal. But I think that even being coding literate and having built enough, and hopefully, I plan on continuing to build my skills. I think that perspective and that knowledge is incredibly, incredibly valuable when you're making business decisions in technology.
Well, you could bring a certain amount of empathy to the position
Yes.
whereas there's somebody who has that wall, which you said you kept hitting, because you couldn't create, you didn't know enough, and you hit that wall with someone. If you're trying to manage them, and you're just
Right.
like, make the magic, okay? You're the magic man. Just make the magic. And they're like, well, hey, that's not how the magic works.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah, it's really hard to do a good job managing something if you can't speak the language, if you can't understand the process and the pieces, it's really hard to do that. So, yeah.
So you got started on online training courses, and yet you're here saying that it's awesome. And it sounded like those things were kind of false starts for you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the online stuff is it helped me enough to know that I wanted to keep going. But I mean, I was honestly shocked at the difference between, learning online for a few months and being in a more structured program for the same amount of time. I feel like I was able to skip, 9 years of what would have been very frustrating, very slow learning and condense it down to the things that I needed to know to be productive. So it's not so much that, and honestly, a lot of the people that we interview on the CodeNewbie podcast are entirely, at least half of them are mostly self-taught, mostly using online resources and books. And I have so much admiration for those people because I think it takes, a very specific determination and work ethic and discipline and faith in yourself to be able to be productive and get a job purely on online. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience, not personally. I am a bit self-taught, although kind of formally trained in computer-y things and then self-taught on software development. But back when I was trying to learn software development, there weren't code schools. These are great things that we have. But what a lot of people that I talk to find is that they go through those motions and they get the excitement and the kind of like that hit of adrenaline that you get, but there's no comprehension that really goes with it. And so and some people can just power through that, like you said, that it's an amazing kind of characteristic for somebody that can go completely through that. But others kind of need a structure. They need other people. And then with that, paired with an online course, with a Linda or a subscription to, I'm trying to think of the one, Treehouse,
Treehouse, yeah.
Code School, sponsor this show.
Oh yeah, Code School, thank you. They're all great. We love Code School. We love them all. But cover all your bases there. It's a great adjunct in that sense, but for a lot of people, it's not going to take you, all the way home.
And I think that the big thing is just direction. I wrote a blog post, I think it's a couple months ago, called I Am Not a Tinkerer. And to me, I feel like those online resources they're great for tinkerers. I think it's great if you want to try things and you're learning things, and it's okay if there isn't a very specific goal and there's not a specific purpose, there's not a an end that you're trying to get to and you're just kind of following along. And I think that a lot of people are like that, and that's awesome. I am not one of those people. I know that about myself. I need to have a very clear purpose. I need to know, why am I doing this in this order, when am I doing it, how long am I doing it for. I need to have that to make the most out of my learning. And to me, that was the missing piece. I think that if I had a senior developer or someone say, you should do this course, don't worry about that one, go to this one next. If someone could kind of give me directions, I think then it would have been helpful. But for me, it was really about the structure and the direction that was really valuable.
Yeah, I'm a hands-on learner myself. I need to have some guidance. I like team. I'm never,
love
though I
teams.
work at home like you, Jared, and Saron, I'm sure do you work from home? I'm assuming.
Once in a while.
Once in a while.
Mm.
I mean, as a loner, so to speak, like my office doesn't have 2 desks in it, right? So I'm usually alone, but in that space, even though that's the case, I have a team. I have Jared. I have others around here that work with us and make this possible. We do. I love team, and I can't learn very well, at least in an isolated environment. It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it's sad. Like, it's just sad. I just get sad when I'm, on my own. And then when things go well, there's no one to high five. You got to high five yourself.
That's weird.
That's not fun. Yeah, exactly.
You got to take pictures of it, put it on the internet.
Right.
Just to prove that you're doing something.
I've spent a little bit of time. I spent a lot of my career as a solo developer in my basement.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have stretches where I don't have a team, and I'm okay with that. Like, it's nice to be around people. It's also nice to be by myself. But what I miss out on is, like, I wonder, am I missing out on, like, could I be better, even as a developer or as a thinker or a problem solver, if I had somebody else that was, riffing and jiving with me? And would I be learning faster? So that some of the reasons why I listen to all the podcasts and I read all the blogs and stuff is I feel like I don't have that much of a community, physically there with me of people who are like awesome developers that I'm just learning from constantly. So I can definitely feel the sense of need for a team. And I do like developing by myself and being kind of a solo, but I'm always on, like, is the grass really greener over there?
Yeah.
Sounds like perhaps it is.
I have my moments where I really like being alone, especially if I'm working on a feature that I already know how to build, tools I know, and I just, put my headphones on and I go, and it's wonderful. But when I'm doing anything new, when I find myself getting frustrated, just having someone I can just tap on the shoulder and say, can you just look at this for me? You don't even have to say anything. Just be my rubber duck. Just look at it and let me talk at you. Like, that alone is incredibly valuable.
I like how you say that, because I've learned over the years that, and maybe you'll lament with this, maybe you won't, but I feel like as soon as I personally say it out loud, whether it's, sometimes it's to the wall, sometimes I don't have a rubber duck there or whatever. Yeah. But I feel like the moment you say something passionately from your conviction, from your heart, you believe it, right? It could be anything. It could be describing how it should work, and you get your own aha moment. You don't really need any sort of reciprocation from the person you're working with. So I feel like the moment you get a chance to speak out loud is when things happen.
Or you think you have a great idea, and then you say it out loud, and you're like, actually, when I say it out loud, that's a terrible idea.
That was awful.
Yeah.
Then you're embarrassed. You're like, I wish I didn't say that at all.
Right.
Yeah. You think I'm just talking to a wall.
Yes, exactly. Something that you said, Saron, about your shadowing experience. This was back when you were, I think you said you were going to be a doctor. Is that right?
Yes, I was pre-med. My parents were very proud of me.
Parents were very proud. Pre-med, shadowing. And you said that's when you hit this point where you were like, I know I don't like this thing. What was that like to be like? Were you let down? Were they let down? Was it hard? What was the experience like trying to step away from, that's a pretty ambitious and courageous, kind of career.
Yeah, it was awful. It was really, really rough. Yeah, so I shadowed this cardiologist for a couple times. Most of the time, it was just him, talking to patients. I just sat in the room and just listened. One time, I actually got to scrub into a surgery. That was actually really awesome. I had to wear, that big lead suit thing you wear to protect your private parts?
Yes.
I had to wear one of those. It was so heavy. That's when I realized how weak I was. And I had to just, stand in the corner for like hours just watching them cut this guy's chest open and put what in the world is it called? I think it was a pacemaker in it. And it was insane. It was like the craziest thing I ever saw. But even with that, I still didn't want to be a doctor. So, at that point I was pretty convinced it wasn't for me. But it was really hard. I felt like I worked so hard in college. I worked so hard. And by the time I graduated in 4 years, I had enough credits to get 3 full degrees. That's how hard I worked. And, I was very active. I stayed up very late. I sacrificed my social life. And at the end of it, I was like, crap, I have no idea what I'm going to do now. And it was, it was really disappointing for me. It was incredibly disappointing for my parents, especially when, I went from well-paying, secure job as a doctor to journalist. That wasn't, that was not fun. But I think that as sad as I was and as disappointed as I was, I knew that eventually I would figure it out. And getting through the crappy parts where you haven't quite figured it out was way harder than I thought it would be, but eventually I knew I'd get there. And I just asked, my parents and, my friends and all that to just be patient with me as I figured it out. But yeah, it was hard because I was always, among my family and my friends, I was always the one who did things right and who planned ahead and who was really organized and had her crap together. And then I just didn't. And dealing with that was rough.
But maybe you said this and maybe I missed it, but when did you actually find the software side of you?
Yeah, so I found it, I guess, so I read the Steve Jobs book a year after I graduated college. And then I got my first startup job. Yeah, I think it was actually just about a year after I graduated. And then
Where was that job at?
That was at Contently.
Okay, still around?
They're still around, yeah.
Wow.
It's like, I know. I say the name, people are like, oh, I think I've heard of that. I'm like, yes, yeah. They made it. Or they're making it currently.
Yeah.
And I think it was two years after that where I actually started learning to code.
So you ended up at Flatiron Academy, which is it a 12-week program?
Flatiron School, and yes, it was a 12-week program.
Flatiron School. 12-week program, full-time, $11,000, as you said. Huge jump there, right? Yeah, just jump in.
Yeah.
Which kind of seems to be something that you just kind of do. You seem like you just jump in. Because you got out of Flatiron on the other side of it. And not before long, you're doing conference talks, you're on the Ruby Rogues. Did it all move really fast once you got into Flatiron?
No, it all felt very slow. I'm very, very impatient. So things never come as fast as or as quickly as I want them to. But I'm very all or nothing when it comes to really everything that I do. So, if I decide I'm going to be a developer, I'm going to be a developer, and I'm going to be in as many places as I can. I'm going to be as involved as I can. I'm going to give everything I have to it. And so speaking and podcasting and CodeNewbie and all that, just falls into the same bucket. What was the hard part for me, specifically with the speaking, was, I applied to RailsConf, I think it was 2 months after graduating from the program. And I no way expected to be considered and, to have my proposal taken seriously. I actually didn't even like my own proposal, but I submitted anyway. And for me, I knew that it was a step I had to take. I knew that the act of filling out the form and putting my idea on paper and pressing submit, that was the act that I wanted to do, because that for me was really, really, really hard. That was like my most imposter moment that I've had so far. And just, when I think of a speaker, I think of someone who's an expert, who's been doing it for years, someone you look up to. I have, very big expectations for that title. And the idea that I dare, submit myself to be one of those people was just a huge mental hurdle that I just knew I had to get over. And so for me, the real win wasn't the speaking, it was pressing the submit button.
Wow. How did the speaking go?
So I think I threw up the night before, and then I got my period immediately after. So that was fun. It was, oh my God, I was so nervous. I was shaking the entire time. Apparently you can't tell from the video, which is great. And I found out that I have, I do this nervous thing where when I speak, I actually clench my butt cheeks really hard. Okay. To the point where my left one twitches. So that's what I found this out
while you're on stage?
I did. I'm like, why is it twitching? Oh, because I'm clenching them because I'm so nervous. So that's what speaking is like.
I have to commend you on being so forward about things that could be embarrassing or probably are embarrassing.
Whatever,
right?
I think, whatever. I mean, it's already happened. What are you going to do?
It doesn't come through on the video, so who cares?
No one sees it twitching.
Good. Exactly. What a great place to have like a nervous tick, right? Like on your butt where no one can see. It's great.
Good point.
Yep.
Well, let's pause here. I know we want to dive deeper into the story of CodeNewbie, where this came from, all that, but we have some awesome sponsors that make this show possible. And if you're out there and you're thinking, man, I love the changelog, I want to support you guys. Well, one, we have memberships, but we also have sponsors. And we don't just put these on here to pay the bills. We put them on here because these are awesome companies we love, and we want you to love them too. So check them out. If you like what they're doing, support them, and that's supporting us. So let's take a break. You've heard me talk about TopTal several times on this podcast, and TopTal is by far the best place to work as a freelance software developer. Well, they have this term elite engineer, and that defines the kind of software developer that works at TopTal. I had a chance to sit down and talk to Brendan Benishon, the co-founder and COO of TopTal, and I asked him, Brendan, what is an elite engineer? Take a listen.
An elite engineer for us is somebody who satisfies all the technical requirements that you would need in a great developer if you're working at like a Google or Facebook. But then at TopTal, you have to add this extra layer on top of it to make sure that people are mature enough and professional enough to be totally self-directed. And so making sure that they take a tremendous amount of pride in their work and that they're accountable and very, very communicative, because in remote freelancing, that's sometimes just as important as being technically competent.
All right, if Brendan got you excited about being an elite engineer at TopTal, head to toptal.com/developers. That's TOPTAL.com/developers to learn more and tell them the changelog sent you. All right, we're back from that awesome break. We got Saron here. We've got embarrassing moments. We've got potential doctorates. New communities forming, nervous twitches we didn't know we had, and then we got this new community, CodeNewbie, and it's so thriving now. And you said earlier you're kind of glad you didn't come on earlier because the show's gotten better, but you've also grown the community quite a bit. But we like to go back to the beginning where things first began, and I think you said it started on Twitter. So maybe start there with if that's where it began for you.
Yeah, that's where it began. I saw a lot of people doing Twitter chats. And if you don't know what a Twitter chat is, it's when you pick a time. We do ours on 9 p.m. on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern time, and you pick a hashtag. So our hashtag is CodeNewbie, CodeNewbie. And we tweet questions for 1 hour, and anybody can answer. So we have a system where we'll say, Q1 is what language are you coding? And then you respond A1, and that allows people to easily follow the conversation. And so we did that for a while. And when we started, I had absolutely zero plans to start a community or a podcast or team projects or any of that. I just wanted, I saw something that I thought was interesting. I saw something that I thought would help people. And so I just started tweeting. And I emailed everyone that I knew and I said, hey, I'm starting this thing. You should totally jump in and join the chat. I'd love for you to tell your friends and tweet about it. And that's where it all started. And eventually it got to a point where it needed to really be its own thing, where people were using the hashtag outside of that 1 hour. And people would tweet us questions and would tweet questions using the hashtag and would have conversations around the hashtag. So I thought, it makes more sense for CodeNewbie to have its own Twitter account and to kind of be its own thing. And then we can talk about being a CodeNewbie full time without it being directly tied to my account. And so that's kind of what happened next. And, it's one of those things that I thought would last maybe a couple months, but it kept going and people kept coming back and people started adding it to their calendars and people were really looking forward to it. So that's how we got started.
Seems like you really struck a chord because there's so many more new developers now than there even were a few years ago. Some thanks to the boot camp, some thanks to the incredible demand that we have in the industry, and also because it's awesome, like you said. Did you know there were so many of them out there when you got started? Was it?
Yeah, I did. I knew because I just being, a part of the Flatiron School and a part of the team there, like I knew the number of applicants who were applying. I'd done a good amount of research on other boot camps and other online programs as well. And I knew their numbers. I knew how many people were looking to apply. I've seen the tweets, I've read the articles. So I knew that there were definitely enough. There was definitely enough demand to have a thriving community. I didn't necessarily think that I would be the one that started that community, but I knew that a community was there somewhere.
Yeah. But you had a voice. I mean, you had your conference talks that give you a voice, and then you were also a regular on the Ruby Rogues. I think you were gone for a while, and you seem to be back now.
Yeah, I got guilted.
Again.
I got guilted into coming back. Avdi Grimm sent me an email, and he's like, "Yeah, I know you're really busy, but I really miss having you. It'd be really great if you came back." And I said, "Well, if Avdi asks, then I think I have to say yes."
Right, you can't say no to Avdi.
So then I came back.
So maybe speak to that experience a little bit, because here you are, you're fresh out of code school, and you have, like you said, you have a moment of imposter syndrome. You're very much a beginner when it comes to an experience of programming.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're invited onto, or maybe you can say how you came onto the show of a panel show of like very expert developers. Can you speak to that experience?
Yeah, that was very surprising. So as part of the bootcamp experience, we're expected to blog about what we learn. And the very first thing that I blogged was on a talk that was credited to Matsu, who wrote Ruby, but it was the wrong person. It was actually a talk given by James Edward Gray, and I wrote my reflection and my feelings about the talk, and it kind of went a little bit more emotionally deeper than I think I meant to when I first started writing it. And he read it. Maybe it was like 7 or 8 months after that, and he said, "Hey, I read your blog post. I really like it. It was the talk that you wrote about was actually by me," and I was like, "Oh, that's equally awesome." And he saw my RailsConf talk, which came out by that time, and he saw my cartoon, which I drew to get into the Flatiron School. And then he invited me onto the show, and he said, "I'd love to hear more about your experience and what that was like." So I came on as a guest to start. And around that time, they were starting this kind of 3-month guest panel. They called it, I think we called it like a Rogue in Residence program, where they have different people coming on for 3 months at a time. And so they really liked the show that I did, and they had me on for just a 3-month period. And then after that, they wanted to keep me on, so they asked me to become a full panelist. And I think that was the second most terrifying thing that I've done in code so far, because every week I had to show up and talk to these incredible people about stuff I didn't really know about, and try to follow along as much as I can, and try to be to be present without sounding too stupid and too beginnerish. And it was really hard. It was really, really hard. But just like submitting that talk, I did it not necessarily because I enjoyed it every week, but because I knew that was a really big step for my career, and I knew that it would help me in the long run. So I kind of took my feelings, I put them, in a drawer, and I closed it, and I said, "You just stop it. I can't deal with you right now. I have work to do." My husband likes to tell me to punch my feelings in the face. So that's kind of what I did. I punched them in the face until they subdued. So
love that. Punch them in the face.
Punch him in the face.
I mean, probably what you had to tell yourself, and maybe you see it now, is that actually a beginner's perspective is a breath of fresh air to people who have been in the industry for a long time. And when you came on that show, it was an angle. It was a new perspective on things that nobody else there could bring, because as an expert, you can't feign fresh eyes. You don't have them.
Yeah.
It's very difficult even to empathize and go back. You try.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that explained a little bit of your success there. So very good job punching your feelings in the face and really facing the fear. Because that gave you a little bit of a platform and a visibility as a very respected newbie. In kind of the greater, software scene. So Then you decided Twitter's not quite good enough. We want deeper conversations. I'm going to turn this into a podcast. Can you speak to some of your early podcasting?
Yeah, sure. So we do our Twitter chats very differently from how other people do them. So if you follow other people's Twitter chats, what they usually do what they usually do is they'll bring on a guest and they'll do an interview with the guest using the hashtag, and then other people can chime in and ask questions as well. And I think that's just a terrible way of using Twitter. I don't think Twitter is meant to have interviews. I don't think you're meant to have deep, conversations. I think you're meant to tweet and have little conversation starters. And so, what happened was we had all these really great conversations happening, but they weren't being explored. They weren't being captured. There wasn't a way to really dive deep. So, I previously worked at NPR and I worked at NPR member stations. And so I always wanted to get back into audio. And I thought, great, this is like how I'll do that. I'll start my own podcast. And the podcast setup process was really hard. I don't know how it was for you guys when you decided on what tools you were going to use, but yeah, it's really hard.
To Adam.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, yeah. it never gets easier, but it was hard in the beginning. It's still hard now.
Yeah, and my husband he's a techie as well. He's not a developer, but he loves technology, does a lot of tech stuff, and he loves, audio and video editing and knows a ton about that stuff. And so we spent almost every evening for about a month trying out different tools and different recording software and different ways to upload audio. We tried so many different combinations before we found the one that worked and before we found the one that we really liked. And, I wanted to make sure my audio sounded as high quality as it could. And I wanted to make sure the guest audio was as good as it could be as well. And so there's just a lot of trial and error. And now that we have a process set up, it's fairly straightforward. But, I think it was 2 weeks ago, he went to visit some family in Florida. And so I had to do one of my interviews on my own. And we usually run all of the, the server and the upload and all that stuff on his computer. And this time we had to do it on mine. So we had to redo all that setup on my computer. And there were just so many pieces. Like I'd forgotten how many pieces there were to get it to work. And a lot of people ask me, I'm looking to start my own podcast. What equipment do you use? And I have, this set email that I've just, copy and send out to people. And there are a lot of steps to it. So it was really hard, but I really wanted to do it. And I love just the excuse of getting to talk to so many incredible people from, all over the world doing really interesting things and being able to just sit and ask questions. That's such a great job to have. You just sit and you're the one that knows the least and everyone loves that, and getting to really ping people about their lives. It's awesome.
I'm curious to know a bit more about the tools and the pieces to your process. Ultimately, I'd like you to tell that story that you told us in the pre-call, if you don't mind. But I'd like to start with the process, if you can.
Sure. So we use Mumble. Do you guys know Mumble?
I don't know Mumble.
Mumble. So it's basically like a Skype. And it was actually created for gamers. So a lot of gamers use it when I don't know how games work, but I assume there's a lot of people and they need to talk to each other sometimes. So they use it for that. Yeah, I think that's how that works. And so a lot of people have repurposed Mumble for podcasting for really two reasons. One, there's a record button directly on Mumble. And when you do record, it records your local copy, not what comes through the internet, which is nice. So you don't get that, that processed stuff.
Right.
And then two, it records in multi-channel. So when the guest is recording, they're recording their local stream separate from your internet stream. So it's super easy. It's just one place that we don't have to open up, different software to do the podcast.
So you record everybody then, or everybody records themselves?
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone records everyone. Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
And so that's what we use for that. And so we run the Mumble server usually off of my husband's computer, and then everyone, and then we have them connect to us, and then we use. Do you know Pydio?
No.
It's a program for Linux that does really easy like file uploads. And so we have that also set up on Ubuntu on his computer, and then that's where people upload stuff as well. And then for editing, we use Audition. And so it's not so much that these pieces themselves are complex. It was more about, so for Mumble, one of the other benefits to it is you get really, really granular control over your audio settings, and we had to figure out what the right settings were. And it took a lot of trial and error to figure out what the right settings were. And the very, very first podcast episode we did not have the right settings at all. And luckily, the person that I did it with is actually a person who started the Twitter chat with me way back when. And his name is Carlos Lazo, really great guy, really great developer. And when we did it, I picked him, one, because he's a great story and he's awesome, but also because I knew that if I had to re-record or if anything went wrong, he'd be the most understanding person. And so when we interviewed the first time, all the settings were terrible. We had to re-record the whole thing, threw it away. The second time that we did it, he sounded fine, but I sounded like crap. And so I had to basically redub myself, which was really awkward because it was, over an hour's worth of a conversation. And I had to fake all the laughing and all the sighs and the pauses and the breaks. And I also wanted to time it so that the timing kind of just fit in with the existing time. And so I did that. And then my audio was still totally wrong. And I was basically clipping the entire time. And I said to myself, I can't believe I have to do this a third time. So I did it again. And I had a transcript of everything I said. And I'm just like...
Stick-to-itiveness.
Right. I was like, we are getting this right.
This is Drive at its best right here.
Right.
I mean, you really wanted to do this show.
Doing it again.
I really wanted to do this show. I really wanted to do it well. And so, I'm doing it and I'm just going, yes, that was great. Ha, ha, ha. And it sounds so awful. And I put it out. And for the most part, people liked it. But then I got this one tweet that was like, that sounded really scripted. And I'm thinking, that's because it was.
Only halfway scripted.
Partially
It was halfway
scripted.
It was dub scripted. Like
This is based on a true story.
Right.
Right.
That's how I should have introduced it. Darn. Oh, that'd been great. What
would be great would be like a B-sides where you release another track, only you change all of the things that you say to make his answers be completely ridiculous. Be part of the greatest hits.
That's going to be CodeNewbie podcast number 2. And it'll just be taking the interviews and making them sound ridiculous. I think my guests would really like that.
I think so.
Might.
I think the listeners probably would.
Yeah.
I gotta give you credit because I just recorded like a 3-second redub, didn't I, Adam?
Yes.
And I couldn't do like 3 seconds. I'm like, this is pathetic.
He even had the visual to go with it because it was a redub for a piece that he did on video, and the audio wasn't perfect, but what he said was good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so if he can get the rhythm right and he get the enunciation right and the enthusiasm right, it would be a win.
Right.
But it was kind of tough,
I
wasn't
do
it,
one or
Jared?
the other. Yeah, and then you're like, can you do it again? I'm like, I'm gonna be here all night. I can imagine doing an hour show.
Oh, it was grueling.
Do you have it scripted, Jared?
What do you mean?
I mean, do you know
No.
what you said?
Oh, do I know what I said?
Could you give us a tease right now of what you said?
Ooh.
No, that was Tuesday. I flushed my RAM, so I've rebooted since then. Sorry.
Got
You'll
to put
have to-
her in. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, it's an interesting way to start because I think there are so many people out there that would love to do something with podcasting because it is a fun medium. Like you said before, it's really fun to be the person to ask the questions, and you get to really meet a lot of interesting people depending upon the show type that you have. And I think there are so many unknowns. There's so many technological unknowns. There's so many audio unknowns. There's so many personal unknowns. Like, can I actually perform? Can I actually do it 3 times? Things like that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is so in the beginning, so when I worked at NPR, I wrote the scripts, which means that I interviewed the guests ahead of time. I wrote all the questions. I did all the research. And the host, so I wrote for Michelle Martin for the show Tell Me More. And she would, read from that script and then, ad lib as much as, she wanted to. And so I went into the podcasting world thinking I needed to write a script every time. And I did, I did like an hour of research on every guest, I wrote out the questions, and it honestly didn't go as well as I wanted. And over time, I learned to trust myself, and I learned to. And right now, I don't script. I don't even. I'll do a quick Google search just so I have main highlights. But I realize that I do a lot better as a podcaster when I know very little about the guest. When I know just enough to ask the right questions, but I don't know the answers. Because then I can naturally take the conversation where the listener wants it to go because I'm reacting and I'm not planning. And that to me was really surprising.
I'm with you there because I've been in the same position. I've had other shows before besides this show here, The Changelog. And there's times when we script it just to give us guidelines, not to script it.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's the better ground. Like if you're going to do anything, give yourself some guardrails to like operate around. Like Jared and I, we prepare sometimes a couple days in advance, sometimes 30 minutes in advance of the show. And it's not so much like preparation. Like we know who the guest is, we know what they're about, but we haven't sat down together as co-hosts and sunk and figured out like, okay, this is my angle, this is your angle. How are we
Sunk?
Sunk up. I don't know, synced
up.
Sunk
up.
Sounds like, we're in a boat and we sunk. Which sometimes we may do that.
Scratch that and make sense of it.
Synced it up.
We synced it up,
Exactly.
and then
Exactly.
but the thing is like I did the same thing with another show I had called Founders Talk, where I would do an hour of research, and I would figure out the backstory and figure out all these different details. And I did have certain questions I did want to script because I wanted to ask the certain way, but I still let the conversation play into
Just
it.
go. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And so I knew how I wanted to ask the exact question, but how I worded it when it all came out, the question kind of came out the way I scripted it, but the way I spoke that fragment of the show wasn't scripted.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And go ahead.
But I was going to say, like, there's a lot of technical pieces. There's a lot of like, there's so many nuances to podcasting that make it a tough job, but at the same time, a very fun and rewarding job.
Yeah, I think that people underestimate how many hours it takes. I don't know how long it takes for you guys, but between booking, the actual interview, editing, and publishing, I think we spend about 6 to 7 hours a week on it. And for our editing, we spend between 2 and 3 times the length of the show. So if we have, an hour show, well, there's your 3 hours. And I think that doing that consistently is hard. And I know that a lot of people have started podcasts and kind of fallen off because they do it the first time and realize, holy crap, I gotta process this and I gotta put it in all the podcast directories and I have to publish it on the website and I have to do show notes. And there are a lot of pieces that go into it. And then there are people who don't care about those pieces and they do a quick 20-minute show and they don't do any editing at all. I'm not one of those people. I'm way too much of a perfectionist to be okay with that. And I think if you do it that way, it's less work. But even then, it's definitely a commitment.
So there's two sides to that coin. We can go deep into this topic, and I've kind of been on both sides where I used to edit. I used to edit ahs. I used to make it perfect. And then after a while, I was like, this is going to kill me. This is going to burn me out. It made me start hating podcasting because it was so much work. And I started to live with the, like I told you before, like if your husband steps in when he comes back, that's okay. We're gonna roll with it. Let's embrace our mistakes, so to speak. And there's a term in radio called live to tape. And it's essentially just taking what you do live and putting it right on tape and not doing much editing or any editing at all. Maybe you do some EQing or, if it's visual, you do some color correction or whatever, but it's pretty much what it is what it is. It's gone to the door. And I like that approach with the option to edit a little bit, but not the ums and the ahs, and not to make like Jared's question come perfectly after mine at the perfect, half a second or millisecond later. It's more like just to make sense of the matter so that it is a good show and it's listenable. And that's sort of our angle when we come to our edits. And our edits, just so everybody knows, are probably about at least one time the length of the show because you got to listen to it.
That's pretty good.
But we watch the timeline. We know that where the breaks are at, and we've gotten to the point where we know. And I would say maybe at least the length of the show and a half, or twice the length of the show. So if it's an hour show, 2 hours to edit, but that's rare. 2 hour edit, rare.
So when you do you all like timestamp and know where the breaks are and stuff? Like, are you doing that right now as we're speaking?
Well, when the breaks, so we take some sponsor breaks during the show. I just look at the sound wave and say, okay, well, there's emptiness there. Or, I listen to it. I jump around the timeline and I just sort of know how long, like, for example, we're 4 minutes past taking a break, for example. We should have taken a break 4 minutes ago. And I know when the breaks are in our show. So because of that, it's easier for me to sit in the editor chair later on and say, well, a break should have been around this space here. Let me jump to that part of the timeline and listen. And that's where I don't have to listen to the whole show. I just listen to like 2 or 3 minutes of different segments. And that's sort of, I think you just kind of get that through experience. Just like with programming, you get with experience, new superpowers, so to speak.
Yeah. So for the ums and ahs, we don't edit them out unless they're distracting. So if we have a speaker who just does it so often that it takes away from the message, then we'll start removing those to just, gather the message a little bit better. And we also kill a lot of dead air. It's funny. So as we're talking about audio editing, my husband's about to walk in. Hey, babe. You want to say hi?
We'll edit this all out.
Nah. We'll leave it in there. Just leave it in there.
That's the whole point, right?
Well, we just entered him anyways. He kind of is a cameo.
He is a cameo. You want to say hi real quick? This is the Changelog podcast. You can say hi. He ran away.
He ran away.
He got really scared and then he ran away.
Oh, maybe that's a sign to take a break then. Let's take that break. I said we were late for to listen to a sponsor. Again, we love our sponsors. They're super awesome. And if you want to support us by supporting them. When we come back, there are a couple more questions I'd like to talk to you about around your podcast. And it's really, well, not just your podcast, but like where you're going with CodeNewbie. And I think you might have the same questions, Jared. I'm going to assume that. But then we have another topic we'll dive into. But let's start there when we come back from this break, and we'll go from there. So we're back. For those out there working solo or on a team tracking time, you thought you were wrapping up a project until the client or your boss asked for a new feature at the last minute, and here you are stuck. You're not sure how much time you're spending on every feature, how much time you're spending on bug fixes or tweaks. Well, Harvest is a time tracking tool built for understanding where your time is going. And for developers, it takes the pain out of time tracking. Just install the Harvest Chrome extension and you can start tracking time right from issues in Jira or GitHub, and you won't have to go searching for your timesheet. Not only will you understand how much time you're spending on client work, you'll also be able to turn your billable hours into an invoice from Harvest in minutes. Harvest integrates with Stripe and PayPal to make sure you get paid fast and on time. There's built-in reporting in Harvest that lets you see how much time your projects took, so you can use that information to make better estimates in the future. For a better way to track time and invoice your clients and take the pain out of what you're doing when it comes to tracking time and invoicing, head to getharvest.com, create a 30-day free trial, and after your trial is over, here's a goodie for all of our listeners. Enter the code CHANGELOG to save 50% off your first month. Once again, getharvest.com, create a free 30-day trial, and after that trial is over, enter the code CHANGELOG for 50% off your first month. Enjoy. We are back with Saron, CodeNewbie, this great story. Jared, I don't know about you, but I'm amazed. Honestly, I'm so excited to have her on the show, and I'm so excited about this story. Like it just doesn't seem to get any better, I guess. But Saron, you said with CodeNewbie when it started, you did some market research. You kind of knew the opportunity. Jared, you asked the question about how wide and vast the developer space is, and what opportunities you might have to educate and teach and lead newbies. So I'm wondering, I don't really know how to ask the question, but I kind of want to open up the topic of the business side, right? There is some sustainability. We've talked about open source sustainability on the show before. There's some sustainability to what you're doing. And I'm kind of curious with that research and with what you're doing, if you thought about how can you do this for not just now, the future. And so what are some of the things you're doing to make it sustainable?
Yeah. So I'm very, very lucky to have such a great, mostly volunteer team. So my husband I got to a point in the podcasting where I got really annoyed editing, and I looked at him and I said, I'm about to just hire, because I used to do all the editing myself. And I said, I'm about to just hire somebody to do this for me. And he said, no, don't worry about it. I'll do it myself. So, every Sunday evening I poke him and I go, remember how you have to do the podcast this week? So I'm very lucky to have him take care of that part for me. We also have a volunteer community manager. All of our team project leads are volunteers. We actually just opened up 2 local in-person CodeNewbie meetups. We have one in Austin, and we have one that we announced very recently in Atlanta. And those are also, volunteer organizers. So I'm so lucky that for the most part, everyone that I'm working with and that has helped came to me. And it wasn't me saying, I need a team lead for this. Who's available? It was them saying, hey, I really want to get involved and I want to help out. I want to bring this to my community. I want to bring this to JavaScript. I want to take on a leadership role. What can I do? And so I think that, when you asked about market research and this community, I think that there's so many people who are excited about making that transition, and so many people who are just really excited and really passionate to be creators for, possibly the first time in their lives. And getting involved is, it's a huge honor for them. And I think that's a huge part in the sustainability question. We also just did a Patreon account. So we do accept, donations if anyone's interested in supporting. It's patreon.com/CodeNewbie. And we also do sponsors on the podcast itself. So those resources have been really helpful. I think that for me, the biggest question has been, where does CodeNewbie go? What is it going to become? And it took me, honestly, a really long time to really understand what it was. When I told people about CodeNewbie, a lot of people assumed that it was edtech. They said, oh, you can turn it into an education startup. And that always made me very uncomfortable. And it wasn't until recently that I understood that better. And I think it's because we're not really solving an education problem. There is not a lack of resources when it comes to learning to code. There's a lack of empathy and community and people. Right, exactly. And so the problem that we're solving is not education, it's loneliness. It's just that feeling of, being completely overwhelmed by this incredible thing that you want to do and you feel like you can't. That's the problem that we're solving for. And once I was able to crystallize that and really focus on that, it became about making sure that the space we've created, the community that we've created, continues to be incredibly positive. When I tweet from, about like half the tweets from CodeNewbie come from me and the other half come from our community manager. When I tweet on CodeNewbie, I take on a very specific persona. I am the ultimate cheerleader. Any tweet that I have, my responses are filled with exclamation points and smiley faces. And, we try to celebrate all of the little wins, all the big wins. And it's really, really important for me to be overly positive and overly enthusiastic. And that has really, defined the community in every aspect of what we do. And so I think that as far as sustainability, it's about being very clear about who we are and what we want to do and continuing to nurture that.
Do you have an end game? Do you have a master goal that you're trying to reach?
I do and I don't. My master goal is to give anyone who wants to learn to code a group of people that they can lean on, that they can reach out to, a group of people who will cheer them on, who will share resources, who will help them get unstuck, who will help them feel less alone. The way that we do that is going to change with the needs of the community. So, we did the podcast in response to this need of diving deeper into conversations. We started the team projects a couple months ago in response to the need where, when you learn to code on your own, you are not, by virtue of being on your own, you're not in a collaborative setting. You're probably not doing pull requests and code reviews. You probably don't, you don't have a Trello board. You don't have a lot of these very essential tools that are part of being a professional developer. And so we created these team projects to create this very, very friendly, collaborative experience where you do have to do code reviews and you have to do pull requests and you have to contribute and you have to pick up an issue. And that was a response to a need that we saw. So I think that the needs of the community will evolve. And our goal is to make sure that we're there to make sure everyone is happy and learning.
How do you feel that's been going so far? You've obviously grown quite a bit beyond just yourself. Even just looking at your blog, I mean, I don't see on here at all, Saron. You have so many contributors: Kaya Thomas, Philip Gray, Jamal Hansen, Jonathan Colin, Farish, Kashif, and sorry. Like just so many people writing, and like it's already seems like such a vibrant community. I'm curious if there's a language divide. I see you have Ruby Monday. Obviously, you have a background in what you've been taught in Ruby and Ruby on Rails, I'm assuming. Yep. There's Python Thursday, and there's Code Newbies in all these different camps. And if you're a Code Newbie learning Java, Like maybe you still
Yeah.
might feel alienated. Have you tried to bridge those gaps?
Yeah, I mean there are many different ways there are many different ways in the community where you can feel excluded. I think that language is definitely a big one. I think in the beginning, especially for the podcast guests, my network specifically is in the Ruby community. So I honestly didn't even notice it, but I ended up having a lot of Ruby developers in the beginning of the show. And I think someone called me out on that on Twitter, and I was like, crap, I need to not do that. So I said, okay, I will not have Ruby developer for the next 10 shows, and I kind of gave myself a little quota. And now I think that we've had slightly more front end developers. Now I got to get back to the back end. So, I'm constantly thinking of, making sure I have a diversity of people when it comes to, race and gender, but also skill set and experience and age and background and all these different things. So I think that it's really, really hard to have a community where 100% of the people you want to reach out to are being catered to. A big one for us is also time zones. Everything that we do is very, very US centric. And I've had a lot of people, tweet us and say, oh, it'd be really great if we could start a Twitter chat, like have 2 Twitter chats, one in the morning and one in the evening. So people in, different parts of Europe can join in. And for a while, I really wanted to cater to that. And I really wanted to get as many people into it as I could. And I find that it's really hard. It's really hard to make everyone happy. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to listen as much as I can and to understand what the major pain points and the major subjects are and build around that. And so for us, US time zones are obviously the easiest for me, the easiest for most of our team. And so we're probably going to continue to be US centric for a while, unfortunately. Ruby, JavaScript, and Python are 3 languages we picked because those were the 3 languages that most people were learning. And so eventually, if we get big enough and there's enough demand for a Java or a Swift or whatever it is. Yeah. And actually Swift is one I would really like to start because I know a lot of people are looking into that. I'm open to it, but it's a matter of, with limited resources and this being a part-time thing for me, how can I best serve the community with what I have?
Yeah, so part-time kind of rings a bell because you do have a full-time job. This is not your day job.
It's my night job.
It's your night job. So you have 2 jobs going, and one of them, interestingly, is at Microsoft, and I'm trying to pull up the title Tech Jobs Academy.
Yep.
Can you tell us about your work with Microsoft?
Sure. So that role I got directly because of CodeNewbie. A person, Tom Black, who works at 18F in DC, had been, keeping up with CodeNewbie and the work that I've done. And he found out about this position and he emailed me and said, hey, I've seen the work that you've been doing for the coding community. There's a position where they're starting a technical training program, a boot camp style technical training program. It's 4 months. It's full time. It's free. It's serving underemployed and unemployed New York City residents, which sounds very similar in spirit to what you're doing, with CodeNewbie. So if you're interested, I'd be happy to recommend you. And I looked at that and I looked at it and I said, I cannot believe this is a job. Like, I can't believe that the thing that I'm doing on the side is, is a job that I can get paid for and have the support of, a really big tech company for. So I was incredibly, incredibly excited to interview and to take that position. It's a 4-month program. We're doing it in partnership with CUNY, which is the community college system in New York, and with the city government. So I think it was a year ago, the city government pledged $10 million to help in workforce training and specifically to get our residents and to get them tech skills that were valuable and that would help them be employable and to get good, high-paying, secure jobs. And it was a $10 million fund called the Tech Talent Pipeline. And we're one of the projects in a portfolio of projects who are working towards that mission. And so, it's 4 months, it's full time, it's free. We've been doing a lot of community work and community outreach with a lot of organizations who are working in a very similar space of reaching these members. And it's been really interesting to me because my network is primarily in dev. It's in tech, but on the coding side of tech. And a lot of my the networking that I do is online. I tweet all the time, and a lot of I love Google Hangouts, and and I love just online communication for the most part. And so this was an opportunity to actually talk to people who were on the ground, who were a couple streets away, and to meet with them and to look them in the eye and get to really see what they were doing very hands-on. And that to me was very different and really incredible. And I feel so honored and amazed at how much work is being done to help other people get jobs and to find their passion and to launch a new career specifically in tech. So
wow,
that's what that's about. Yeah.
Sounds like a great gig.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It is crazy that that's actually a job, though.
I know. I looked at that. It's one of those jobs where I thought, maybe there's something interesting like this that I would get to in a couple of years, but to be able to do it now, at this moment, at this point in my career it came a lot sooner than I expected, but it's been great.
So how did you leave, or how did you deal with kind of leaving the coding world to a certain degree to take a role like this?
Sadly, I left it sadly. It was kind of, it was weird, and it was weird to explain it because I don't know. I felt like people would think that I was abandoning code, that I was only going to be there for a short amount of time, and it wasn't that at all. To me, this was an opportunity to impact lives in a very, very, very tangible way, and to throw myself into something that I basically do in my spare time for free. And so that's really where the pull came from. But, I was very clear with my team that, at the heart of it, I see myself as a developer first and foremost. And I want to make sure that I'm maintaining those skills and that I'm still getting to code as much as I can. And actually for the past, I think 3 weeks, I've been coding like 80% of the time
Nice.
that I've been working. So that's been really great. Yeah. But I was worried about it. I think people took it better than I thought. And I think that people really understand what I'm passionate about, and they're more happy for me than they are like disappointed that I'm not in a specifically a coding only job.
Mm-hmm. So what about CodeNewbie with regard to Tech Jobs Academy? Are there synergies there? Are there conflicts of interest? Is there anything like that you feel between the two institutions?
Yeah, it's very different, but the spirit is very similar. So, for me, a lot of the people in the CodeNewbie community come from very, very different backgrounds and have very different experiences. I mean, we have dancers and teachers and truck drivers and, stay-at-home moms and dads. And we have, veterans, and we could just have so many different types of people. And one of the things that most of them have in common is that they're using code as a way to improve their lives. And so in that way, I feel very connected to that mission of helping people improve their lives, provide for their families, build better futures by having a really exciting career that they're passionate about. And so, my favorite parts of meetings that I get to have with the city and with Cooney and with other Microsoft team members is when I get to say, as someone who went through this process of going through a 3-month boot camp and learning how to code, this is what it's like. And I can bring a perspective that really no one else at the table can bring. And I think that is incredibly valuable. And being able to not just speak on my experience, but to speak to the experiences of all the people, or as many people as I've talked to in our community, has been just a really, really great synergy.
This also introduces me to something I had no idea existed, which is Microsoft New York. I just
That's
figured.
a thing.
I thought Redmond was that was Microsoft, but apparently there's a New York.
Yeah, we actually have 2 buildings. We have our main building in Times Square, which is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we have our Microsoft Research Center, which is in the Flatiron District. And we actually, so my team is the tech and civic engagement team. And our job is to engage with the city and with the government on issues like civic tech and politics and education and city planning and just a lot of citizenship type things. And so this is one of our education initiatives that we're doing. And we actually don't work in either one of those buildings. We work out of this co-working space called Civic Hall. which we're one of the sponsors for. And Civic Hall is a co-working space for people who do civic tech. And it's such a great room of people who are in all different, people who do more politics and policy and that side of things. But then there's also like developers and designers and more tech people too. So that's where I get to spend my days.
Cool.
You get to cross any paths with the Code for America people?
Yeah, we actually I think they had a Code for America summit recently, like a month or two ago, and it was at Civic Hall. So yeah.
Very cool. So are you a NYC native or are you a migrant?
I'm an immigrant and a migrant. I think I can be both, right?
I don't know. Yeah.
So
Sure.
I was actually born in Ethiopia,
Okay.
and then I came to the U.S. when I was almost 3 years old and lived in the D.C. metro area for most of my life. And then I moved up here to the New York City area 4 years ago.
Very cool. Immigrant and a migrant. That's quite an accomplishment there.
I think it's my biggest accomplishment.
You think so? I don't know. You're stacking them up here. Might be a good point for us to take our final sponsor break, hear from another one of our awesome sponsors. If we come back, we will continue discussion and, of course, close up with our awesome closing questions. We'll be right back.
Imagix is a real-time image processing proxy in CDN, and let me tell you, this is way more than image magic running on EC2. This is way better. It's everything your front-end developers have dreamt of. Output to PNG, JPEG, GIF, JPEG 2000, and several other formats. And if you're like me, you've ever argued with your boss or a teammate about serving Retina images to non-Retina devices, you'll appreciate their open source dependency-free JavaScript library that allows you to easily use the Imagix API to make your images responsive to any device. Now, all of this takes a platform, and the Imagix platform is built on 3 core values: flexibility and quality, performance, and affordability. When it comes to flexibility and quality, Imagix has over 90 URL parameters that you can mix and match to provide an unlimited amount of transformations that you need for your images. And they take quality very seriously. And because of their commitment to quality, several top 1,000 websites in the world trust them to serve their images. Now, when it comes to performance, Imagix operates out of data centers filled with top-of-the-line Mac Pros and Mac Minis, and they're set up for a completely streaming solution. This means your images never hit the disk. Images are served by the best SSD-based CDN for delivery around the world, anywhere, extremely fast. And while we're talking about speed, almost all the image processing happens on GPUs. This means transformations are super fast when compared to competing virtualized environments. And lastly, it's all about affordability. Everyone wants to save a buck. That's how the world works. Because Imagix processes close to 8 billion with a B images per day, they're able to make certain optimizations at scale and pass those savings on to you. To learn more about Imagix and what they're all about, head to imgix.com/changelog. Once again, imgix.com/changelog, and tell them Adam from the Changelog sent you. All right, we're back. We got Saron. This is the final piece to this show. We love going deep with our guests. And Saron, it's just so easy to just talk to you. I've loved this conversation, honestly.
It's great talking to you. You guys rock.
Thank you.
This is the most conversational podcast I've done. I really like this style.
Awesome.
It's fun.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of style, I like your style. And I like what you're doing with Microsoft. And during this, because this last piece, if you didn't notice as a listener, and as a guest, obviously, I was sort of taking a backseat because Jared got great questions. I love some of the direction Jared takes the show sometimes, and I just wanted to sit back and listen. And while I was listening, I couldn't help but think that the synergy that you described and that Jared kind of pulled you into is that the thing that you're doing at Microsoft now and what you're doing at CodeNewbie is so close. I'm curious if you think, because Microsoft does like to acquire things, if they would ever sort of like acquire CodeNewbie or empower you to and employ you to build CodeNewbie, like if that's a thing and if you would do it.
Yeah, that's something I honestly hadn't thought of before, which is which is kind of surprising because I think about that kind of thing all the time. But I think that the reason why I didn't think of that is because at the core of it, CodeNewbie is a community, and acquiring a community feels funny. You know, it really
Maybe
feels
adopting,
funny to me.
you know,
Maybe
supporting.
adopting, yeah.
It's all about
I like the adopting a community.
all about
That's a good way
semantics
to put it.
Because you're right,
It
they
is.
couldn't acquire it, but they could empower you to. Because
That's true.
when we ask the questions about sustainability, you know, for example, with Node, you've got companies like Joyent supporting Node for
Sure.
years, and other companies. So there's definitely this, and Jared, you can lament to this as well on the show.
VMware supported Redis for a time, and
Right.
it was like it wasn't like out of goodwill. Obviously, they had a vested interest in Redis, but they weren't therefore like running the project. They were just letting Antirez, I can't remember his real name.
Yeah.
Antirez.
Felipe Salvatore.
Salvatore. Yeah, thank you. They were just letting him work on it. And so maybe it'd be more like that relationship, not like this is our thing now, but like we love you, we love what you're doing, we love this community. You know?
Yeah.
Make it to like a
I'm gonna
501c3 or a 501c, I think 6. There's an option for, I forget which C it is, but something that makes it not so much that it's not a real thing. I'm not belittling by any means by saying that, but giving you this layer of the same support that you said you love by going there and doing what you're doing. Because you said, I can't believe this is a job doing this. And I think what I thought was kind of funny when I was sitting there listening was like, you've already got the job. You already had the job, right? You're just doing it for Microsoft.
Now I'm doing it. Yeah, that's true. I'm doing the job in a more official capacity with definitely more support. But yeah, I would totally be open to that. Yeah, I definitely see it as being at the very least like a 20% project or something that I do for part of the time.
Right.
And I definitely see like Microsoft is so invested in the community, and we do a lot in terms of supporting, specifically in New York, we do a lot on the team with supporting local hackathons and organizations and community members and things like that. So I definitely see this fitting into that portfolio.
You know, on that note too, just I see this happening too, and I see Microsoft commercials, and there's a time when I was like, I just want them to come back in a good way, and this is like 4 or 5 years ago, and I think they have been coming back. There's a side of Microsoft that's like this corporation, and there's like this product side, and there's the side that you're on, which is like supporting and loving developers and like rethinking the way they think about as a corporation about technology and the people that make it. And I love Microsoft. I think they're doing great. I love what you're saying here about how they're supporting the community. And I think listeners out there, I don't have a ton of knowledge about it, but I'm just for Microsoft. You know, I think it's great what they're doing. And I'm excited about that because we need more people like that, more things like that happening.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you know, it's funny because when I first heard about the position and the program, I was honestly kind of skeptical. You know, when I think about like a really big tech company, regardless of who it is, doing a program like that, I thought to myself, there has to be an angle. You know, there has to be like a thing where they're greatly benefiting in some financial way. And the great thing about the team that I work on is we don't report to sales. We don't report to a business division. Like we're under corporate affairs and relationships. So we're all about relationship building and genuinely about, you know, community. Like our metrics are, you know, how many people did we help? You know, what did we do to improve lives? Like that's how we measure our own success. And then me being able to lead that program, you know, I get to say what direction we go in and, you know, how we approach conversations and what we do. And, you know, seeing that they're genuinely invested in the community has been a huge relief for me personally. And it's really great to see that and get to work with that.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we are getting a bit long in the tooth here. We do have time, of course, for our awesome closing questions. I'm going to ask a little bit of a different one today, specifically for the CodeNewbie audience and for people who are interested in your experience and the experience of the community. So if you had the ear of the open source community and beginners to experts, and you had a tip or a trick or an experience as a beginner developer that you could relay, what would it be?
Yeah, so my advice is around getting a job. So when I got my very first job from boot camp, I was a hacker in residence, which is possibly my favorite job title ever. And I worked at the New York Tech Meetup, which was the largest meetup organization in the world. They have, I think, over 42,000 members at this point. They do a monthly demo night showcasing all different types of technology in New York. It sells out in minutes, every month. And our job was to build a platform for it. And when I got that offer, the way that we did it was we had a science fair. And employers, I think we had about 100 employers come in, and we had a little booth set up with our computers, and we had to talk through the thing that we built. We had to talk through our student projects. And I'm pretty sure I was the only person in our class of, I think we had 45 people, who only had one thing to show. And I had exactly one app, and it was a note-taking app for video where you play the video and then you can take notes on the side, and it gives you timestamps, and you can play back the video when you click on the note at exactly the point where you took the note. So your notes and your videos were always in sync. And when I when I planned how I was going to talk about the app, I focused on things that I knew would make me different. And I focused more on, if you watch any of my talks, then you know that I love to draw and I do a lot of cartooning. And so I spent a lot of time focusing on the color scheme and the design, and the splash page had a cartoon on it. And I focused so much on the UX and on the things that I knew that my classmates were not going to focus on. And when I talk through it, I wasn't trying to impress anybody with my one controller and my, actions, because that's, these are senior developers, these are CTOs, these are people who are not going to be impressed by anything that I can make in 3 months. And so instead, what I focused on the design stuff. I pointed out the fact that I didn't use Bootstrap. I, did my own designs, and I did my own CSS mostly from scratch. I talked about how I thought about the user flow. I talked about the things that went wrong and how I fixed them. I talked about the struggles that I had. I talked about the lessons that I learned. And above all, I was incredibly excited to talk about everything. And, I was so excited that usually there was no time for them to ask me questions, which was part of the plan. It was great.
Right. Yeah.
I
guess our time's up.
Yeah, exactly.
You're hired. You're not.
And, I think that I kept meeting with employers for at least an hour after the science fair officially ended. And that evening, I had my first interview. And out of that one science fair, I had booked, I think it was 7 interviews for the following 2 weeks. And it's not that I was necessarily the best coder. It's that I knew how to pitch, and I knew how to communicate, and I knew how to talk and show the best that I had. And the best advice that I give to code newbies is to do just that. It's to find the things that make you different, the things that give you the edge. And the great thing about people who are transitioning into tech is they come from very different fields.
Yes.
That's an advantage. And I think that a lot of people are self-conscious about that, and they think, oh, I've only been coding for 2 years. I've done, marketing for 10 years. That's awesome. Use your marketing angle. Talk about those experiences and talk about how you communicate and how you pitch. There's so many other skills that you can bring that are valuable to being a developer, and knowing how to position yourself has been just an incredible part of my journey.
That's excellent advice. Adam, we want me to cut that up and have a soundbite right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do our next one here. The old saw that everybody has to answer when they come on the show, which is, who is your programming hero and why?
Ooh, I like that one. I like that one a lot. I think my programming hero is Katrina Owen. So Katrina is a developer, an incredible speaker. We spoke together at Bath Ruby earlier this year, and I think she went on right after me. And I thought I did a pretty good job. I was pretty happy with my talk. And then she went up and she just killed it. Oh my God.
She practices relentlessly, which pays off. Spades.
She does. Yes. And the reason why she's my hero is because, I know a lot of really great developers. And I know a lot of people who hone their craft and who are just very good. And when I talk to her, and we've become pretty close in the last year, when I talk to her and I've learned more about her background and her story, I've never met someone with such great work ethic. Like, she really, really cares, and she puts in the time and she puts in the hours. And, if you if you've been listening to this podcast, you probably know that I work very hard too. I think she works harder than me, and I don't know many people who work harder than me. And just, seeing her grow and knowing, how much time and sweat she puts into her craft, and then her side project Exorcism, what she's doing, purely for the benefit of the community, and how much time and effort she puts into helping other people learn to code as well. And, us very much being in that same space. That's, to me, what makes a hero. It's not just, the end, because when you see someone on stage and you hear them speak, you think, oh, they're a great speaker. But it's knowing the backstory and the journey. It's knowing what it took to get there, and knowing what I know from what it takes her to get to, where she is. That to me is very heroic.
Very good answer. For those interested in Exorcism, we did have Katrina on the show, episode 108. So check out changelog.com/108. We also hung out with her a little bit at GopherCon, and are in talks to have her back on for a little bit of a catching up with Exorcism here this fall, or perhaps in the winter.
I was going to say, we're due for a catch up, because that show that you just mentioned was October 16th, 2013.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
It's,
you're
it was a while back.
It's a bit back. It's when it first started, and we laughed actually
story.
Because the Exorcism client that was written, the CLI, was originally written in Ruby, and it was rewritten in Go. And that show was when it was still not fully transitioned. So she laughed at GopherCon, saying, "Oh, that's a long time ago."
Yeah, yeah. She's an incredible person.
Absolutely.
Well, Saron, it's definitely been fun having you on the show. I know that we tend to go deep. You said it was fun because it was conversational. It's the most conversational show you've been on. But it's been a blast having you. It's been a blast learning about your journey from the different backgrounds you come from into code. And I love, what you said there, which was to if you're new to software development or design or programming or whatever, not to forget about the history you bring to the subject matter. Just because you're new at developing a software program doesn't mean that you're new at developing something. I think there's a lot of knowledge to really bring in. That's an important fact to not forget to those listeners out there. So, Saron, you hail from CodeNewbie.org. So if you're listening, we do take show notes. Check those out. CodeNewbie.org. We had 4 awesome sponsors for the show: CodeShip, TopTal, and Harvest, as well as Imagix. I said and because we usually have 3 sponsors. And Jared, we launched something new ourselves recently, Beyond Code. Do you want to mention Beyond Code real quick? Like I know it's at beyondcode.tv.
Right.
And it's something we do at conferences. What can we say about this fun thing we do?
Yeah, so for those of us who like our closing questions, we ask similar questions to those. Everybody gets the exact same 5 questions, and we really get to meet the people at the conference after parties. We launched Season 1, which is at Keep Ruby Weird. Season 2 is coming soon, Space City JS. Check it out, beyondcode.tv. Super short interview series. We think you'll really enjoy it.
There's a mail list there too, so if you want to know when the new seasons get announced, go ahead and subscribe. We'll let you know. Beyondcode.tv. We also have a couple emails as well: Changelog Weekly and Changelog Nightly, both respectively at changelog.com/weekly or /nightly. Those are awesome emails. If you don't subscribe, we make sad faces, so you should subscribe. But Saron, it's been such a blast to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us and just taking the time just to share so much about what you're doing. And we definitely want to be an encourager of you and what you're doing in your community that you're building. So definitely stay in touch. To the listeners out there and to the members that support this podcast and what we do at the Changelog, we thank you so much. Jared and I really appreciate all the support we get, but this is now the time to say goodbye, so let's do that. So goodbye from me.
Bye.
Goodbye.